Remember back in the lecture on planning the project, we spoke about the two questions answered by the planning component of scope management. We said that the scope comprises both the what and the how of the project. In other words, the scope baseline gave the project team and stakeholders the answers to the questions, what do we want to achieve and how do we go about achieving it. The project manager has a sufficient answer to the what of the project after the project requirements have been identified, documented and approved, and a clear scope statement based on these requirements have been developed. All of the activities leading up to the approval of the project scope statement are firmly based on exactly what will be included in the project, what will be excluded from the project, and even what should be avoided by the project. The next piece in the puzzle involves translating the project objectives and the deliverables identified in the project scope statement into specific, well-defined work activities. In other words, the specific jobs and tasks that must be done by the project team in order to achieve the project objective and create the specified deliverables must be identified and documented. This is of particular interest in large, very complex projects where it may become easy to miss or even duplicate certain work activities. This is done in answer of the how component of the project scope baseline, and it is where the procedure known as the work breakdown structure comes into play. The work breakdown structure is created in order to ensure that all project activities are identified and defined to the extent needed to ensure that they will be correctly executed by the project team and to ensure that none of the activities will be missed. In essence, it acts like a traceability document for the project activities, which is later used to monitor and control the execution of the work. The work breakdown structure is also used in subsequent planning activities to determine other information required for the thorough planning of the project. The work breakdown structure, or the WBS, can be defined as a deliverable-oriented breakdown or hierarchical decomposition of the project into smaller, more manageable components. In order to better understand the importance of the WBS and how it fits into the project management, we will be taking a closer look at the main aspects of the WBS definition, captured by three phrases which are deliverable-oriented, decomposition, and manageable. First, let's zoom into the deliverable-oriented nature of the work breakdown structure. As the statement suggests, the tendency in project management practice is to focus on the project deliverables when creating the work breakdown structure. It is important to remember here that not all deliverables are physical, tangible products. Deliverables can therefore include reports, process outputs, tests, and the like. When developing the project WBS, it's important to think about all the work that has to be executed in order to create each of the project deliverables. In essence, the WBS serves to significantly expand on the details documented in the scope statement. The scope statement describes the main outputs or deliverables, while the WBS breaks these deliverables down into smaller components and in the process defines all the intermediary deliverables such as reports, drawings, and specifications that support and facilitate the creation of the main deliverables listed in the scope statement. The work breakdown structure is considered to be one of the key components of effective project management, and you will be hard-pressed to find any project management methodology which does not make use of this process. There is, however, significant variation in industry viewpoints when it comes to the WBS. The work breakdown structure originated as a medium to create a visual representation of all the work that has to be executed on the project, just as it is suggested by its name. The project management industry has, however, to a large extent altered the legacy approach of breaking down the work to an explicitly deliverable-oriented structure. The actual work that has to be done or the activities that has to be performed are specified in other independent documents, usually as part of other processes. The approach suggested by the Guide to the Project Management Body of Knowledge 6th edition is a good example of this practice. According to the PMBOK Guide, the deliverables are specified in the Create WBS process, which is a process that belongs to the Project Scope Management Knowledge area. The deliverables specified in the WBS is then further broken down into the activity level as part of the Define Activities process, which belongs to the Project Schedule Management Knowledge area. There are, however, some project managers and project organizations that still prefer to break the deliverables down into work to be performed and to include all this detail in the work breakdown structure. We personally prefer the method suggested by the PMBOK Guide 6th edition because there is some merit in keeping the work breakdown structure as simple as possible, and showing decomposed information up to the work to be executed level adds an immense amount of detail to the WBS. But we will talk more about the merit of simplicity later on. Regardless of which approach is followed, the WBS remains a very important project management tool. The second aspect of the WBS definition we are going to spend some time on is the word decomposition. So the work breakdown structure places focus on the main deliverables as well as the supplementary or supporting deliverables. But where does the subdivision come in, and how is all the data presented? Any deliverable in any project can be viewed as a collective system which is composed of subsystems which are in turn composed of components. Creating the WBS is all about subdividing the project as a whole into these smaller elements or components. In order to do this, the first step is to break the project down into the main project categories, which are referred to as sub-projects. These sub-projects can then further be decomposed into what is commonly referred to as work packages, which are groups of related work activities or tasks within a sub-project. The work package level is typically considered to be the lowest level of the work breakdown structure. These work packages are then further decomposed into activities as part of other project management processes. These activities are then used to determine the project duration and estimated costs by means of bottom-up estimation techniques. The WBS, therefore, as a rule, consists of three levels, namely the project level, the sub-project level, and the work package level. In the case where the project forms part of a program, the WBS is given another level at the top, namely the program level. In the case of a program, the WBS levels therefore become the program level at the top, followed by the project level, the sub-project level, and the work package level. The number of levels and their respective names are of course dependent on the project management methodology being used and the procedures and requirements that exist within the organization. The levels shown here are what are most commonly used in practice, and they also adhere to the recommended format of the PMBOK Guide 6th edition. The names and levels generally do not matter, as long as the principle of decomposition is applied. The ultimate purpose of the decomposition of the project is to reduce the complex project into several smaller and less complex elements which are sufficiently defined to allow for easy planning, budgeting, scheduling, and monitoring and control. The final component of the WBS definition we will be paying some closer attention to is the purpose of manageability and how this is accomplished by the WBS. Before we jump into the manageability aspect of the WBS, let's first spend some time thinking about effective management in general terms. Management is the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. Making something manageable is therefore the process of creating components that are able to be controlled or dealt with without difficulty. Although there are innumerable schools of thought pertaining to effective management strategies and towards facilitating manageability, one thing they most likely all have in common is the philosophy that management of complex systems should be approached by means of breaking the system up into smaller, less complex and more controllable portions, and then assigning or delegating management responsibility in terms of the components rather than the whole. Back to the manageability of a project and the role that the WBS plays in enabling this manageability. So we have now talked about the decomposition aspect of creating the work breakdown structure and how this decomposition is done by the purpose of making sure that all deliverables, including those with supporting roles, are accounted for. This decomposition plays another role in that it subdivides the project into smaller portions which are more manageable and to enable more effective delegation of duties. The role of the project manager on a project is to manage, not to execute. This sounds like a simple, straightforward statement, but there is an unbelievable power in realizing the real truth behind the statement. The best project managers spend all their time acting as facilitators and catalysts for progress rather than trying to achieve the progress through their own efforts. The real power in project management lies in delegation of responsibilities and management of high-level issues and spin-offs that result from the work execution, as well as focusing on monitoring the execution and project health and then appropriately responding to project status. If project managers spend too much time physically doing the work, they don't have time managing it, and consequently problems start slipping through the cracks. In all forms of management, successful management can be proven to be mostly dependent on the ability of the manager to delegate effectively. In other words, good managers get things done by other people. And it's exactly here that the importance of the manageability aspect of the WBS comes in. By dividing the complex problem into sets of related tasks, known as work packages, the project manager can more effectively delegate these sets of tasks to individuals who are appropriately experienced to execute the type of activities that comprises the work package, and by doing this, the project manager is applying one of the core principles of effective management, thereby substantially improving the manageability of the project. In overview, creating the work breakdown structure is therefore the process of breaking the project down into smaller chunks that ensures all work is accounted for, making management easier, facilitating effective delegation of responsibility, and providing better traceability for the purpose of monitoring and control. So now that we have discussed what the WBS is, let's take a quick look at the logical process flow followed when creating the work breakdown structure. When project management reaches the point where the WBS needs to be created, the initiating processes as well as the plan scope management, collect requirements and define scope processes have already been completed. In other words, the stakeholders have been identified and sufficiently engaged in order to compile and improve the project requirements document and the project scope document. The project scope has therefore been thoroughly defined in collaboration with the stakeholders, and further planning is now required to start determining how the identified deliverables will be created. The time has now come to start putting together the core project team as well. The work summarized and documented in the project scope statement is therefore examined, and the main deliverables or main areas are identified. These main deliverables typically make up the sub-project level of the project breakdown. From here, the project manager starts identifying the core project team members or the team managers to whom the sub-project will appropriately be delegated. And I say appropriately delegated because work is delegated based on the relevant experience and area of expertise of the core project team member under consideration. Note that these team members can be internal or external to the implementing organization. The main difference between the internal and external team members lies in the fact that their involvement will be concluded in the form of an agreement for the former and a contract for the latter. After the sub-project managers have been identified and assigned, the project manager typically liaises with these individuals to develop the detailed sub-project scope for which they will become responsible. This is a very important aspect of the WBS creation. Project managers are typically generalists with vast knowledge of the entire field, and in some cases they may have some specialist knowledge in certain specific fields as well. But it almost never happens that they have specialist level knowledge of all fields. And it's for this reason that it's important to consult the subject matter experts that will be responsible for the sub-project components when the detailed scope, including all the supplementary deliverables, are developed for those sub-projects. Remember that the purpose of the WBS is to capture all aspects of the scope up to the work package level, and who better to assist the project manager in making sure that nothing is missed pertaining to a certain component of the project than the person who is experienced in the field of relating to that component to whom the work will be delegated. The project manager, in consultation with the manager of the sub-project, continues to break down the sub-project until all the deliverables, which include the main deliverables and the intermediary deliverables, are defined and there is consensus regarding the scope of the sub-project. Once they are in agreement regarding the detailed scope of work up to the work package level, they further collaborate to determine the estimate time, resources and cost of the sub-projects. This is, however, usually done as part of the processes that belong to the schedule and cost control knowledge areas, and as such we will not be going into more detail regarding these aspects in this course. What is, however, sometimes included in the WBS is the agreed high-level time and cost constraints, as these factors may exert significant influence on the scope development of the sub-project. Information such as the time and cost constraints are typically included in the initial work breakdown structure dictionary and later elaborated on. We will revisit the WBS dictionary in just a second. Once the project manager and the core team member responsible for managing the sub-project reaches agreement regarding the scope of the sub-project, the primary responsibility for further planning and works execution is delegated to the sub-project manager, who will regularly report to the project manager and present his or her future plans relating to the project aspects such as cost, time, quality and so on to the project manager for approval prior to moving on to the subsequent tasks. In the case of a subcontractor being appointed to execute a certain sub-project, these details are typically captured in the procurement contract, which also includes details on their communication and approval requirements and channels for the project going forward. The fact that the manager or subcontractor takes full responsibility for the further planning. Once each of the sub-projects have been sufficiently broken down and all work packages have been identified, all the information is combined to form the work breakdown structure for the project. The WBS will, just as is the case with the requirements documentation and the project scope statement, have to be reviewed in consultation with the project sponsor and relevant primary stakeholders to ensure that everything is accounted for. Once the stakeholder engagement and review process has been completed, WBS is approved, and together with the WBS dictionary and the project scope statement, they form the complete scope baseline, which will be then used to monitor and control the execution of the project. This baseline can only be altered or revised when a change request has been processed through formal change control channels, which we will take a look into at a later stage during the course. The final aspect of the WBS we are getting to spend some time on is the WBS dictionary. In order to define the scope of the project in sufficient detail, it is of course necessary to go into some more detail pertaining any relevant information necessary to facilitate the execution of the work package, as well as the activities and work processes that will be executed within each of the work packages. This is where the work breakdown structure dictionary comes into play. The WBS dictionary is a document that provides details pertaining to each work package within the WBS that's required for further planning activities, as well as execution, monitoring, and control. This information typically includes further details regarding each of the specific deliverables, the work activities, and scheduling and cost information. You most probably already realize that the scheduling and cost information required to form part of this WBS supporting document have most probably not yet been compiled at the time of creating the work breakdown structure, and you are completely correct. Remember that project management is an iterative process even when a predictive lifecycle approach is used. During the initial scope management processes, the WBS dictionary will typically only include information such as the responsible team members, the required deliverables, required inputs, and so forth. In other words, everything that is known at that point in time. Once the scope planning process has gone through the first iteration, the time and schedule of planning activities will be conducted, during which information pertaining the activities and their associated cost and time metrics will be determined, and the information will be added to the relevant WBS dictionary entries in successive scope planning activity iterations. The information that's usually included in the WBS dictionary of each work package includes the following: the work package name and unique identifier code, the manager of the sub-project, the project team member responsible for the work package under consideration, the project team member responsible for each activity within the work package, time, cost and resource constraints, milestone data and other due dates, and required quality measurements and acceptance criteria. Resource allocations forms a very important component of the information contained in the WBS dictionary, as this information influences time and cost for the activities. Seeing as the resources and the estimated engagement time is reflected in the WBS dictionary, it may be worthwhile to get the project manager as well as the affected functional managers to co-sign the WBS dictionary. This is especially important in purely functional organizational structures where the functional managers are committing their departmental resources to projects and they remain responsible for the time and workload management of those individuals. As previously mentioned in this lecture, the WBS is an absolutely vital part of any project management methodology, but there exists some contention in project management practice as to how the WBS should be used and how it should look. As a general rule of thumb, it is suggested that this approach outlined in this lecture be used for larger projects. By not decomposing and representing the work up to activity level on the WBS, the document is kept shorter and more manageable. Further details can be provided in the relevant WBS dictionaries, and the information can be determined in the course of other project management activities. This is also typically in line with the more prominent methodologies such as PMBOK and PRINCE2. For smaller projects, there is however some merit in considering breaking away from this approach, remembering that a large contributing factor in project management is the ability of the project manager to tailor methodologies to the project and organization's needs. Every process and document listed in the project management methodology is not an absolute necessity, it's merely a guideline. On smaller projects, the WBS can include decomposition up to the activity level. This works for smaller projects because they have only a few activities and the WBS remains uncluttered even with them being included. The benefits in this approach lies in the fact that scheduling is simplified to some extent in that the activities are already listed as part of the WBS. We personally prefer to make use of the PMBOK method, and we limited the work breakdown structure detail to work package level. Then again, Gerrit, our content creator, mostly involved in intricate and complex engineering projects which consist of several disciplines and multitude of activities. Trying to include all these in the WBS would make for a very clumsy document that cannot be really used to assist in execution management. The choice of the approach remains the prerogative of the project manager within the boundaries of what his or her employing organization will allow, of course.